So let's say you have to make a free throw. That's not that hard, right? It shouldn't be that hard. But as you're making that free throw, if you're worried about what if I miss this shot? What if missing the shot loses us the game? Thinking about the outcome makes it harder for you to actually execute. So you're more likely to fail when you worry about the outcome.
Hey guys, we're Unconventional Norms. We share stories of people who have found success or are on the path to find success in their own unconventional ways. In society, we've seen this common culture to have to get perfect grades, to always compare ourselves to others, and needing to get to the top college in order to reach success. And we really want to change this culture to see that there are many different unconventional ways to find success.
Right. So today here we have with us teacher Kim Long Vo, and he teaches at Westminster High School, and he has quite the unconventional teaching style. So first off, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story and like how you got to where you are today.
Okay, that's a lot. You guys are going to have to remind me which step I'm on because I'm probably going to forget. Like he said, I'm Kim Long Vo. I teach at Westminster High School. The subjects I teach are music, AVID, career technical education, and I also coach esports. I think that covers it all, sort of. It's complicated. What else? What else should I talk about?
Maybe talk a little bit about how you ended up becoming a teacher, because I know you didn't necessarily plan on being a teacher in the beginning.
Yeah, so that's like most careers people end up in. The path is kind of convoluted. I know when I was graduating from high school and we were doing college applications, I did not plan on being a teacher. Definitely not. Back then, during applications, I was thinking about becoming a film composer, writing music for movies. So I applied to Cal State Long Beach with the intention of going there because I knew that my music teacher went there and he highly recommended the program. So that's why I chose that school. Applied to a bunch of other schools, got accepted into some, got rejected into some, but that didn't matter to me because I wanted to go to Cal State Long Beach. That experience was really interesting because being Vietnamese American and saying, hey, I want to study music and not violin or piano was a pretty big deal. And when I was telling people what my major was, people wouldn't even pretend to go like, oh, that's so interesting. That's nice. Like they wouldn't even pretend. They would just say, oh, you're going to starve. What's your backup plan? How long do you think you're going to last? Like no filter, just straight up calling it out for what they thought it was. So that was interesting. I did it anyways because like I had a really good experience with music in high school. So working with the people that I had interacted with in high school, I knew that I wanted to continue with music. But that lasted for 3 years. Then I changed my mind, switched to human resource management. And that was because of a summer job I worked for the 2 years before that. Did that for a year, decided, oh, I actually want to go back to music. Graduated with a performance degree in percussion while on the side working photography and events like conventions and things like that. Did coaching music, photography, and events for 2 years, then decided, oh, I want to be a teacher. And that was in spring 2013. No, fall 2013 was when I decided I wanted to be a teacher. And then spring 2014 was when they actually started a credential program. Yeah.
Well, what made you want to become a teacher?
The specific experience I remember was in fall 2013 when I was still coaching music. The band director at Westminster High School he had an extended leave of absence. So there was a substitute teacher subbing for him, but I was still the assistant director and like the lead coach. So I pretty much ran the program because substitute teachers can't really run music programs. It's just too complicated. So it's fine. But that experience, I remember there was one day, I can't tell you the exact day, but I remember that there was one rehearsal that I'm on the podium conducting and running the group. And I remember thinking to myself, I enjoy every single moment of this. I should do this.
going back to what you said about majoring in music at Cal State Long Beach, I know there's always like stigmas and doubts people have. So did you kind of like see yourself? How did you deal with that? Did you experience it? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
I think that somewhere along high school, like pretty early actually, I developed a pretty stubborn personality. Like I knew I was right and I'm going to do what I think is right kind of personality. Like there were specific experiences in high school that I remember where teachers would tell me that they wanted things a certain way, but I knew that my way was better and was right, and I still did it anyway at the expense of my grade. I don't recommend anyone do this if you care about your grades, but I didn't care about my grades, so I'm like, oh, a B's fine. That's a complicated one.
So then, like, other than being a music teacher, obviously, like, uh, how does music impact your lifestyle? Like, other than being a music teacher?
I think that a lot of how I think about just everything comes from a lot of my experience as being a musician, whether it's how to practice, how to learn, how to deal with being in front of people, how to deal with messing up, or problem solving, or staying up late because that's what musicians do, things like that. Like a lot of that just comes from my experience of being a musician, I think.
And you also mentioned like in the earlier stages, you knew that one of your passions was music, and you said you were doing photography on the slide and a lot of other interests. And how can you differentiate interests and passions? I know a lot of people, it's really hard to discover your true passion that can translate into a career. So how can you differentiate a passion and an interest on the side?
Okay, there are lots of parts of that question. So how to translate a passion to a possible career? I think that if you might need help. Like it can be hard to do this alone, but it's probably possible to figure out how to turn most passions. I mean, I don't have a list of passions that I can go yes, yes, no, but I think considering how the world works today, with creativity and some support, it's probably possible to turn any passion into a career. So I think the hard part is figuring out what that passion is, right? I think the advice that I usually give people is whatever you're doing now, dedicate 100% of your energy into that moment. So like right now we're doing a podcast. Focus 100% of your energy into this podcast. If you're doing something else like cooking, put 100% of your energy into cooking. Because if you don't put 100% of yourself into something, it's hard to know if you really enjoy doing it because you're not fully experiencing it for what it can be. But the worst thing that can happen is you discover you don't like it, so then you just do something else. So I think that's why I do so many different things, right? Because hey, this is really interesting, I'm going to do it. This other thing is really interesting, I'm going to do that. This one random thing that somehow I got involved in, that's also really interesting, I'm going to work really hard on that. So that was why for me, there were 2 years after graduating from undergrad that I spent doing a bunch of different things because I was just throwing myself into all of that. And I told myself, the one thing that I find myself doing the most and putting the most energy into, that is what I'm going to keep doing. And that turned out to be teaching.
I know that a lot of people, when they hear someone doing a lot of different things and spreading themselves so thin, they see that as like a negative thing. But to me, like I see it as a positive thing. Like how you said, the only way you can find your passion is just to really dip yourself into the different areas or different interests that you're interested in and continue to put 100% into it.
I was just thinking about like on the flip side, like me personally, I always feel like I'm like a what's the term, like a jack of all trades, master of none, because I did like a year of yearbook, found out I didn't really like it. I did like a couple years of show choir, found out I didn't really like it. I did volleyball for 2 years. I ended up quitting that too. And like I do so many things, and I feel like I still have not struck gold yet with what that one thing I'm passionate about is. And it's like this, I don't know, it feels like I'm kind of like lost or something. What would you say regarding something like that?
First, do you know the whole saying of jack of all trades, master of none?
Yeah,
Oftentimes
still
better than master of one.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. That's debatable. But in terms of doing a lot, but still not being able to find your passion. I think it helps to have people to talk to about these things, so maybe they can steer you in a certain direction. Maybe someone who has ideas, because in all your experiences, would you say that, like, let's say yearbook, did you 100% hate everything about yearbook, or was there like some little tiny thing that was kind of interesting but everything else was all right?
Like looking back on all the things I've done, I never like actually regret it. Like that 1 year of yearbook, I wouldn't not do it. It's like I wouldn't keep on doing it for all of my high school years, but it was a good experience in learning how to like use Photoshop and how to like take photos and stuff. And those are experiences I couldn't have gone other places. So like uh I don't regret doing it, but I still feel like I have no direction for I want to go in the future.
I bet if we dig into the different experiences you've had in yearbook or all of your other activities, I just chose yearbook because I like photo.
Right.
You can probably pinpoint experiences that you really enjoyed, even though you don't want to keep doing yearbook. But if we look, we can probably find patterns for what those experiences that you enjoyed are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like a common thread between
Mm-hmm.
all of the different things.
And sometimes that's hard to see, right? Like,
Yeah.
like it might point you into a different direction that you never thought you'd go, but there has to be pattern somewhere in there, especially since you said that you don't regret the decision to participate and that you did get value out of the experience. Yeah.
So how have you been teaching with all the quarantine going on?
It's been challenging, right? Because it's been challenging for everybody and everyone's schedule's been throwing off. So my number one concern is to make sure that everyone is well, because that is way more important than whatever checkboxes I have to check off for my class curriculum or whatever, right? Because if somebody, let's say one of my students is, their parents lost their job and they're working too just so that they can feed their family, that is way more important than them showing up to my class and completing some assignment, right? Because that's actually someone's life and hunger and stuff like that.
You like prioritize like the student's health and like their outside life because you don't know what happens with them in between school and their at-home life. So can you talk about how that kind of is translated into your grading philosophy and how that works?
Yeah, even before quarantine, I had a strict policy for myself where I will not grade students on anything that happens outside of the classroom, because that is so hard for anybody to control, right? Like who knows what can happen? Maybe someone's really lazy, or maybe they actually have to work really hard for whatever reason. Like I don't know, right? But to me, it only made sense to support students and grade them. Like I hate that term, grade them within the confines of the classroom, because like if we're going to call their job at this point to be a student, then their job is working in the classroom, not working every single waking hour, right? Like this is why I think most homework, like most mandatory homework, if not all mandatory homework, is kind of a bad idea, because it's really inequitable, because not everyone has access to the same resources, right? Like if someone has access to tutors, they should do better than someone who doesn't have access to tutors. But if we're grading people on outside or on the work that they produce outside of the classroom, are we grading them on their ability, or are we grading them on access to resources? And the other thing that I hate is we're training people to take their work home and work and to overwork. Like a lot of teachers complain about how there's so much work that they have, right? But we're training students to be the same way. They go to school for 7.5 to 8 hours, not including sports and activities, and then like you have 4, 5, 6 hours of homework after that. That doesn't make any sense, because depending on how bad your workload is, so let's say you're taking 6 classes. I think that's probably not enough. Some of you guys are taking 7 and then like out have other activities too, right? So let's say you have 6 classes and you have 1 hour of homework. That's 6 additional hours. So if you wake up at 6, go to school, 1st through 6th period only, you would get home at like 3. That's being generous, right? So 3 o'clock. If we just add 6 hours to that, that's 9 o'clock already. We didn't account for eating, showering, exercise, or anything like that. So if we add that in, then that's 12 o'clock. So if you have to wake up at 6 o'clock, that's only 6 hours of sleep. When we know that teenagers need more hours of sleep, like at least 7.5 to 8. Some people a little more. So it mathematically just doesn't make any sense either. Like you literally can't do anything. You can't explore your passions because you don't have time or energy to do it. So if you're not sure what to do after high school, that's not surprising because you haven't had time to explore that. The only people who might have an idea is people who are people who got lucky, or people who were lucky enough to have found something that they're passionate about through school.
So how do you remedy that in your own classroom?
I don't require homework. If the work can't get done in class, then that's bad planning on my part. So I need to plan the time better. If the student was slacking off in class, then we have the conversation about why they're slacking off. But if the time wasn't there, then I can't hold the student accountable for that. If there are special circumstances, then I might ask the students to do work at home, but it wouldn't seem right to hold them accountable for that.
And Trung talked about your grading system and how it was different from the traditional grading system. So can you talk about that too?
So my experience with exploring non-traditional grading systems started 3 years ago. Yes, 3 years ago, when I randomly joined a professional development group that explored a no-zero policy. I had no idea what that meant at that time, but it was really interesting to just think about alternative ways to grade. But after 2 additional years of exploring that, after that first year, I realized that the number itself doesn't matter. So I think my grading system is really unique because it's not actually that unique. It's unique in my school because I've moved the percentages around, and in some of my classes, I actually call it bronze, silver, gold, plat, diamond, master, grandmaster instead of A, B, C, D, E, F, because why not? Like, actually, for some students, they understand what the competitive rank system means better than letter grades. Because think about this. Don't do this. Don't actually do this because your teachers are going to get mad. But if you go to a random teacher and say, "Hey, what is the difference between a student who has a 90.5% and a student that has 91.2? Like, what is that difference? What does that difference mean?" That's a hard question to answer. Like, can you guys tell me what the difference between like a low A- and an A is, other than you didn't get as many points in the class? So in my class, if you have an A-, what it means is you're doing exactly what I asked you to do and you're meeting all the expectations. If you have an A, it means sometimes you're meeting my expectations, but sometimes you're going beyond that. That makes more sense, right? When I explain like that, it makes sense, right? But what is the difference between, this is a really hard question for a lot of people to answer. What is the difference between a B+ and an A-?
Is that a rhetorical question, or do you want to stand?
No, like I'm just asking, like, can you guys answer that? Most teachers struggle with answering that too, because that's just how the point system kind of lets your grades land. So in my class, a B means that overall you're really close to meeting my expectations, but there are just certain areas that are holding you back. You have a strong grasp of foundational skills, but you haven't mastered them yet. Like sometimes you might demonstrate mastery, but in general you don't. If you have a B+, it means that like maybe I don't actually can't put a percentage on this, but you occasionally demonstrate mastery, but a majority of your work still shows that you're close. And then the last component of someone who has a B+ is that person doesn't always believe in themselves. They don't have the self-efficacy to say that I can do this, because sometimes there's self-doubt.
Do you get any pushback from like students or teachers that they're like, no, I want a traditional grading system?
For students, most students don't push back because I did the math and the conversion during the semester that I tried this new system, and the only people it really affected were borderline cases where like maybe that 89.9, I don't round by the way, 89.9 student now has like an A minus instead of a B plus. So it only affected borderline cases, but there were like 3 out of all my students for all my classes. Everyone else landed in the same letter grade that they did before I did the conversion. The students who push back the most are the ones who are used to doing just enough work to get 100% because they're pretty smart, but then they're not that hardworking because that's what the expectation was set in the class. You meet 100%. So they did enough. That's fine. Right. But in my class, if you did just enough and you met my expectation, that's only 80%. So that disparity drove a couple of my students nuts because they were used to just being able to work hard enough and getting 100%, but now I'm telling them it's an A minus, and that hurt some people.
And that's really funny because at Oxford, I think I'd say 90%, maybe not 100% of kids would be an A minus student in your class. And I think we would give you so much pushback on that because we're taught to do the work, get an A. That's all we do in class. We want to get the A. We don't really care about learning the material. We just want to know the material enough to score well and get an A in the end.
I feel like the other thing is, like, even though an 80% would be an A minus in your class, it's still so ingrained in our heads that 80% is a B. Like, if I saw an 80%, I would think, oh, it's not as good as like a 90% in another class. But like, you can't compare them because the skills just aren't the same. It's just how, like, we're just set on thinking that 80% a B, 70% a C, 60% a D, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I talked with one of my principals, one of the assistant principals at the high school, as we were exploring this topic. And the hardest part of doing something new, like this new grading system, is 100% letting go of everything you've known before. Because if there's any baggage from the previous system, it's very hard to understand this new system. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, the percentages itself doesn't matter, but in any new approach to grading, because, and you guys touched on this, because we're so used to a certain way of how grades work, it's very hard to break away from that.
Right. So I feel like from what I've seen, like in general, there's like 2 reasons why students go to school. One reason is to get good grades, and one reason is to actually learn the content. How do you take the emphasis away from actually getting the grade and putting the emphasis on like genuinely learning and genuinely having that curiosity to learn?
That's a tough one, right? Like, that's the biggest struggle that all teachers go through, is how do you motivate kids to actually learn? I can't give you a checklist of all the things I do, but in terms of grades versus actual learning, I really don't talk about grades much in class. And when I do, it's more of like feedback on, hey, here's how we use this information so that we can improve. Like, hey, I gave you this score because I think that you're here. These are the things that we need to do in order to progress. Because that's what the grades are supposed to be, right? Is a feedback system.
Yeah.
But that's not really what anyone uses it for, including students, right? Students and teachers. By just focusing more on the content itself, and how do I say this? Yeah, by focusing more on the content and the feedback and really de-emphasizing the score and the grade itself, I think that plays a role into it. This kind of goes into sports psychology, right? Like, do you guys play basketball? You guys know what basketball is, right?
Yeah.
It's the game. Thinking about the outcome makes it harder for you to actually execute. So you're more likely to fail when you worry about the outcome. So by focusing on doing instead of what's going to happen, what I have to do is be very careful with the language that I use when I'm talking to students. And one thing that I also do is I also train my students to be able to hear real feedback when someone says something to them, because most people don't think about this stuff. So they might mean well, but the way they give the feedback might actually be less effective. But if the students, like, if I can train you guys how to hear real feedback, actual useful, actionable feedback from a comment, then no matter what feedback you get, you can still work with that. So, like, for example, in tennis, let's say you're just learning how to hit the ball over the net and actually make it to the other side, right? Pretty important skill in tennis. And you're just starting out. So sometimes you hit the ball too high and it goes out, and sometimes you hit the ball too low and it hits the net. So if I phrase something like, why are you hitting the ball so low? Just by phrasing it like that, that carries so much emotional baggage. It just makes you feel terrible, right? But if I phrase it like, how would I phrase it? So instead of having that judgmental tone, if I can just distill it down to just pure objective facts. The ball went too low, angle, or make sure you follow through on your stroke all the way to over here. No judgment at all. That is actually actionable, because okay, what happened? Now what? What do I do with the what happened, which is follow through on your stroke, right? That you can do something about. The hard part is we've been receiving bad feedback for so often in our lives that we've learned to talk to ourselves like that. So we have this terrible inner voice that says awful things to us. Like, let's say you've finished your chem test and you got it back and you got a score that was lower than you would have liked. You go, oh man, this test was so easy. Why am I so bad at chemistry? But what good is talking to yourself like that, right? Like, all it does is it brings you down, and now you feel less motivated to work in chemistry. But if you just look at the problems that you miss and you go, okay, well, where did I make a mistake? How can I learn from this? Then you're not worried about like the outcome itself. You're just looking to, well, here's what happened. What can I do with this?
I think a lot of the time, the only answer as a student that we come up with is, I just need to study longer, study harder, study for a longer period of time, and hopefully that'll translate into a better grade. But I think you make a good point where we don't really dissect our mistakes, and that's just how we're like, we were taught to think,
it's not necessarily your fault either, right? Because if a teacher doesn't train you on how to do the meta learning, which is like assessing your own learning and being able to look at it to how do I say this? Did you guys understand what I mean by meta learning? So like learning about learning.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the skills to be able to study and to be able to look at your mistakes and figure out where things went wrong, if you don't have those skills, then you can't do that. Where are you supposed to get those skills? In school. Right. Like, it should be from school, right? But a lot of times, especially when it's with higher performing students, there's this expectation that you just somehow know how to do that. Like, I know for myself, I got through high school by doing like one of the worst strategies for getting through all these AP honors classes, which is just work harder and do more. Like, I remember AP Bio, I did pretty well in that class, but I did really well because I read each chapter like 5 times, which is insane. Like, why would anyone do that? And that kind of workload is not sustainable. So after a certain point, you just kind of hit a wall and it's harder to keep going. But if instead we're trained, like for teachers, if we train students how to be critical of their own learning and equip them with the tools, so like equip you guys with the tools to figure out how to change directions and move in the right direction, then learning would be so much easier, right? Because if you got something wrong and you're like, I don't know how to solve this, I guess I'll just work harder. That's not really a solution. It's like just, you can't just fix everything with a hammer by hitting things harder. Like, sometimes you need a different tool. And if you don't know what that tool is, then you can't use it because you don't know it exists.
Mm-hmm.
So the job of teachers should be to equip you guys with those tools.
I was really interested in when Trung said that you're the esports coach, and when you said that in your intro too. So can you talk a little bit about the esports like program, what games you play, how like the tournaments and stuff work? Because
I have a
like
question for
obviously there's the esports club, but like I don't really know how it works. So if you could just explain that. Sorry, Ethan, you have something to say.
Before you do that, I'm curious. So like you talked about how like when you're teaching a student, you like it's important for them to like not only like realize they made a mistake, but actually deconstruct like why they made that mistake, how they can improve on it in the future. Is that also how you coach your esports team?
It's how I do a lot of things. But yes, whether it's music, esports, Avid, just talking to people in life, it's a lot of exploring why and what's the next step. Here's what, now what. That's what one of my teachers at UCI always said. Here's what, now what, so what. Here's what, so what, now what. So here's what happened, what does it mean, and then what do we do now? Yeah. So before I talk about esports in the academic setting, I have another story about how esports got me to be a teacher, actually.
Go for it.
So have you guys heard of this game called StarCraft? Trung, I know you have.
Yes.
I know you have.
Heard of it, never played it.
So it's a really hard game, right? Like I've talked with professional esports players and coaches and said, hey, you guys should play this game. It's great. And the response is always, oh, no, it's too hard. So like professional people who actually work in esports think this game is stupidly hard. I think it's really fun. Yes, it's hard, but it's fun. After my junior recital in college, this was 2011, I thought that I would reward myself by going out and buying a game, the sequel to one of my favorite childhood games. I say childhood, that's sixth grade. So I played a lot of StarCraft Brood War when I was in sixth grade. I stopped in middle school and high school and most of college because I just focused on that. But I thought, hey, I'll reward myself by getting this game that I remember really enjoying and putting a lot of time into it. And it was a hard game and I wanted to get good at it. So I had to learn how to practice a video game. Like I kind of, not really. No one ever taught me how to practice music. So I kind of struggled with that. But I had to learn how to practice through a video game. But that experience actually taught me a lot about how I learned. And if I didn't have that experience, I would not be a teacher, because if you don't know how learning works, if you don't know how your own learning works, how can you work with someone else's learning?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't do that, how do you be a teacher? So because of music and video games, I'm a teacher. Without those two things, I would not be a teacher.
I really like this idea of like comparing learning to like learning in the classroom to learning in video games, because I was actually tutoring my friend, helping her with the SAT the other day, and like it was hard for me to like explain how to study for the SAT, but I started explaining it with like Valorant analogies. You play Valorant?
I have played Valorant, but I'm more of an Overwatch person.
Oh, me too. me too. Yeah. So I was like telling her, because I think the intimidating thing about the SAT is it feels like every test copy you have is different. Like each time it's a new challenge and it's kind of intimidating. But what I was telling her was it's kind of like playing Valorant or any like shooter game. It's a different team that you're fighting each time, but as you continue to like keep practicing more and more, playing the game more and more, your game sense gets better, and so now you know your plays, you know like which angles to peek, where to place your crosshairs. And it's the same thing with like the SAT. Like the more and more you practice the SAT, then you start to like develop like a game plan, because when you look at it, each of the questions on the SAT, they're the same each time. Like they're not the same words, they're not the same numbers, but they're all like the same format. And so like once you have that game plan, it's like Valorant, where now you know how to peek these angles, now you know where to put these crosshairs, you know where the enemy might come from, you know what the question might be asking, and then it's a lot easier to get a better score on the SAT.
And I think this is one thing that games do a lot better than anything academic, is the feedback system in games are so much more effective, because if you peek a corner too far without like anticipating the enemy being there, you're just going to die, right?
Right.
But you get that feedback right away. You know, oh, I should not have peeked that corner. I should have like flashed it instead. You don't get that in the academic setting. You might get like feedback from your essay like a week later. Maybe a good teacher would give it to you 2 or 3 days later. So it's hard to make adjustments and learn fast. So like this is why I always feel bad whenever I take more than like 2 days to give feedback to my students, and it happens. But it's got to be frustrating on the student side because you're sitting there wondering, did I do well? I don't know. So you can't change at all during that time. All you're doing is just having anxiety build up. So that's not very helpful.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think for video games too, like it's been easier for me to like metacog my performance in video games than in the classroom. Like I know like when I'm by no means a good Valorant player, but like I wanted to get better. So every time I died, I would like I would clip it and then I would like watch it back afterwards and say like, okay, what did I do wrong? Maybe my crosshairs were kind of low. And then I would even send it to a friend who's better than me. And I would say like, what can I do to improve this performance? And like, I see you guys are laughing, but the crazy thing is that's not something that I do in the classroom. And so it's weird. Like, how can the video game teach me to learn better than a classroom can teach me to learn?
Well, the reason you feel so comfortable improving with video games is that the tools that you have to improve on make sense to you. You know what those tools are. You can clip the clip, and then you can send it to somebody. You can rewatch it yourself. You can change it. You can free cam and things like that, so that you can see all the different things that are going on. But with schools, what are the tools? So that goes back to my other point: is we just don't know what the tools are in the academics setting. So like honestly, like a lot of people would just be better students if they're taught how to be students. Right. So instead of teaching the subject, or instead of only teaching the subject, if students are also taught how to be students, they would just be better students, because that just kind of makes sense when I say that, right? If you teach someone how to be a student, they would be a better student. Because if you teach someone how to be a historian and hope to be a better student, then maybe they become a better student.
So I'm not sure if you already answered this, but like in your classroom, what are the main real world skills that you really want to teach and emphasize in your classroom?
That's a hard question to answer, because I believe that whatever jobs and problems you guys are going to face, so like you guys, I guess me too, whatever problems we face in the future, we actually don't know what those are. For example, like no one can say that they predicted 2020 to be how it is, right? Like, right. Nobody could have predicted how we're in the situation that we are now. So the most important skills, I think, are being able to figure out how to solve a problem and being able to work with each other to figure out how to solve a problem.
Yeah, I love that. I think I'm not sure if this is kind of tying into what you're saying, but are you kind of talking about like teaching them how to feel like comfortable being in like that uncomfortable situation of not knowing how to solve that problem and trying to find different ways of solving it, such as asking your friends, asking your peers? Because I feel like that's a problem that a lot of the smart people who don't really work hard have trouble with, because all their life they've been smart, they don't need to try as hard, and when they face that uncomfortable situation that life hits them with, they're gonna react so much worse than someone who maybe less IQ but more of like EQ of being able to understand how to get through that situation.
If I could explain this. So in school, a lot of times the problems that we have to solve are pretty clearly defined. You look at a math problem and you know, oh, well, it's asking for that answer, right? And maybe once in a while you get a word problem, but then if you've taken enough classes, you can kind of figure out, okay, well, this problem's actually asking me this, even though it has all this extra baggage on it. So the problems are really well defined for most of our classes. But in the real world, sometimes we don't even know what the problem is. We just know there is a problem. Something doesn't feel right. So how do we even define what the problem is, right? So do students get enough practice defining problems on their own? I'm going to say no, right? So in a lot of my classes, or in my classes, I will spend time developing people skills, like working on basics and fundamentals, where the problems are more clear cut, because that way I need to work on the skill. But then if I don't take the time to throw you into problems that, like, maybe I don't even know how to define the problem, but then we all explore the problems together. If a student doesn't have a chance to practice figuring out what the problem is itself, then once you get into the real world, you're just going to feel really lost, because no one knows what the problems are. We think we do sometimes, but not really. We're just making the best guess that we can, right? And it's okay to get help. You don't have to do it alone. That's also a really hard one for students to realize. At least that's true for my experience. I had to do everything on my own, and I was really stubborn in high school, so I had to solve every single problem on my own, and I had to get it right. But that doesn't really work, right? Because that only works in the academic setting, because the problems are so clearly defined. But when, like when Ethan, when you're talking about how you don't know what your passion and your future career is going to be, that's a hard one to answer on your own, because now you're just picking random things you're doing and hoping you discover it.
Right.
But if you reach out to somebody else and just have the conversation, then at the very least, maybe just by having two people who are lost together, you can kind of figure something out. And then maybe a better outcome would be someone could kind of just nudge you the right way. And then an even better outcome would be someone who's like an expert at doing like career counseling, who can really show you what the possibilities are and help guide you a certain way.
Okay,
Yeah.
I hate to switch topics, but like I'm really curious about this question. What do you think about students who compare each other based on each other's grades? Because at Oxford, that's so common. That's like all we talk about. All we talk about is academics and grades, and oh, what did you get on this test? What did you get on that test? And like, what is your opinion on that?
So first, I feel kind of bad for Yash's question being totally sidestepped right now about esports. So we have to come back and talk about it.
Right.
Because I think it does matter in this conversation about academics, right? Like, I think it is important to talk about esports, because a lot of us, do you guys all play video games, even if it's casually?
Yeah.
It easily gets addicting, right? And there's a reason for that. But okay, let's talk about comparing each other, because that's kind of the culture that we've grown up in, where the most important thing is how well do you do in the test and things like that, right? I think it's hard to force other people to change, but on an individual level, we can let go of worrying about the outcome. Like, the test score doesn't matter, which I make it sound really easy, but that's actually kind of hard to do, right? But someone has to be the first person to let go of worrying about grades. And it's hard for students to do it on their own. I think teachers do need to be part of this conversation too, about letting go of worrying about outcomes and focusing more on the learning. Because if we worry about test grades and scores and things like that, then, like, you guys know, you're not really learning anything. You're just figuring out how to maximize scores. And you've gotten really good at being efficient with how you spend your time so that you can maximize scores. So in a sense, you have learned something. It's just not the subject that the teacher intended you to learn. Where was I going with this? I'm not sure how to answer that one. But I know that overall, as a school community, we need to, and this includes universities also, right? Students, teachers, colleges, parents, like, everyone needs to let go of the outcome, because it really doesn't mean that much, especially when you consider about how messed up the school system is and how messed up our society is. It really doesn't matter. Like, is someone who went to Harvard really going to be that much better than someone who went to Cal State Long Beach? Maybe you can find one or two people, but then you can also find people who went to Cal State Long Beach who are very good at what they do. They just don't have a piece of paper that says Harvard on it. And And then even then, like a lot of these prestigious schools, why are they prestigious? It's because they're in a they came up in a system where somebody, I don't know who, somebody decided that they're going to dump resources into these schools, so then they just became better. Based on my experience with how schools are, a lot of it is very dependent on where resources are spent. Like, I remember when I was going to transition from middle school to high school, everyone thought that Westminster High School was like terrible high school. I shouldn't go there because I'm going to get beat up by gangs or stuff like that, right? Which wasn't true. I never even saw a fight when I was at high school. Everyone thought that there was another high school down the freeway that was so much better because everyone's so much smarter. But a lot of that is because that area is a higher income area. People can afford tutoring, people can afford SAT classes, things like that. So yes, it's going to do better because there's more resources dumped into it. But does it mean that it's better? I don't think so.
I love that. Yeah, that's so
So
true.
like for me, I think it's more important to not worry about all these systems. Like it's hard because the way the system is built, it rewards doing well in school. It rewards getting high scores and things like that. But there needs to be more leaders who recognize that the numbers really don't mean anything when you look at the bigger picture. Like someone who scores, what are SATs out of now? Like what's the max score in an SAT? 1600 again. So like someone who got like a 1550, are they really that much smarter than someone who got a 1300? I mean, that's so hard to answer, right? All we know is that in that moment, they were better at test taking. We don't even know if in the long run they're better at test taking. It's just in that moment, that was how it played out. And so why do we put so much emphasis on these numbers, right? But it's because so much of the next step of our lives are tied to these numbers. But those next steps are decided by people who usually have more resources than us. Therefore, they just want to maintain that power, right? Like going back to grades, one of the reasons I hate grades is because it's a way for teachers to maintain so much power in the classroom. The teacher pretty much has all the power and students have none. Like unless the teacher does something totally illegal, but like if they stay within the confines of this is what my job is as a teacher, they pretty much have 100% power because of how schools work, especially with grades, right? Like one teacher on a whim can decide to change one number that can actually affect the outcome or that can actually affect the rest of a student's life. Like let's say someone wants to go to a school where you pretty much have to get a straight A's, where you pretty much have to have over 4.0 straight A's to get into the school. Like you guys can imagine several schools like that, right? I'm sure some of you guys are going to apply to some of those schools. But what if you had this teacher who, to no fault of their own, actually the reason doesn't matter. If just for some strange reason they gave you a C on a big assignment because reasons. Well, that pretty much just ruined your shot at that school just because they chose this number. And it could be because they didn't have coffee and they had a bad day when they were grading stuff. So, and you happen to ask a question and that made them angry. So then when they're grading your essay later, they just gave you a bad score. That could have ruined someone's future just because they didn't have a cup of coffee. Isn't that insane? Like that doesn't make any sense that a teacher has that much power in the classroom. No one can do anything about it either. Like a principal can't go to the teacher and say, hey, I don't know about this grade. You shouldn't do that. Because that actually, I think that actually breaks a bunch of contracts and the principal can get into a lot of trouble.
Really? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I always thought that like principals could do that.
So like there are lots of things that protect teachers' rights. And one of the things is teachers can, they get the ultimate decision with grades. So as long as they can justify it, which it's really easy to justify because the teacher creates the expectations and they create the rubric. So even if the rubric is designed to be less favorable for certain students, they can still justify their choice in the grade. So the power is still 100% on the teacher, which again, makes absolutely no sense that there's that much power, because it's so easy for a teacher to just, yeah, I'm just gonna ruin this kid's future. They're not thinking that, right? Like, no teachers, I hope no teacher's gonna think that. But it happens, right? You guys know it happens, because you have people who break down into tears because they got like a B+ on a test, because they know that that can actually ruin their future. So I don't know. Like, I don't have an answer for that, because more people just need to decide that grades and scores are actually stupid and just not care about them.
And it's
But
so
when there are
hard.
still people who care about them, then
Yeah.
can you stop caring about them? Because if you want to progress into the future, into your next career, do you have to worry about that?
Hmm.
So that's a hard question. But the
And I think
conversation needs to happen.
what's so much harder about changing that mindset is like how you said with the teaching philosophy. Different is so hard to convince people to try to change to, because like we don't know the outcome and like all these different variables about the what ifs, and so we always want to stay the same, and that's just what makes it even more hard. And like not even the fact of how like parents are, a lot of Asian parents are forcing this mindset onto their kids of like, oh, if you got a B, that's an Asian F and all that stuff.
Do you want to go back to talking about the esports question that I asked earlier?
I guess I have one more thing about grades. So the irony of grades is, if you want the best grade possible, you have to stop worrying about grades, even if grades are important, right? Like I know I just talked about how long I go on about why grades are stupid and dumb, but even if you wanted the best grade possible, you still have to not worry about grades, because if you worry about the outcome, that gets in the way of you performing your best.
Right.
So it's kind of ironic, right? Like, if you want to get a perfect score on a test, you have to not care about getting a perfect score.
It's like the free throw shot that you talked about earlier, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the psychology is really, really, really weird. I think the reason I did really well in school wasn't because I cared about grades. It was because hard problems are fun and I'm going to solve them because I like to win. Like that mentality was actually what carried me through high school. I remember in calc, I would always start from the last problem, because the hardest problem is the most fun problem. And I had to solve that problem because I am stubborn and I will win because it is fun. So that's that kind of mentality was, it's a very gamer mentality, actually. Hard mode everything, 3 heart challenge, right? We do things that are hard because it's fun. I can play Fortnite, or I can play Overwatch, right? Like, I'm going to choose the more fun one. But a lot of us aren't taught how to develop the right mindset to be successful. So we just kind of adopt what exists at school, which is a terrible mindset, right? Like a lot of high stakes, high performance mindsets at schools is terrible, because you just feel awful all the time. Yeah. So in order to do well, you have to let go. Sounds like some kind of Jedi thinking or something like that.
Inner peace kind of thing.
I think
But it's
you'd be
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I think that you'd be the perfect person to like convince parents as to why gaming is so important, because you know how to connect it so well to academics, and like how like your personal experience made you become a better student of like that gamer mentality.
Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between like high level competitive gaming, like with esports, and just casual gaming, right? Like if I'm just playing Candy Crush and just melting my brain, like that's not useful. But like a lot of us who play games at a high level, like especially the esports people, that's a way for us to push ourselves and for us to grow, to be better. So it's those mindsets from gaming that are important, and not I'm just gonna swipe random stuff, which it looks like I'm playing 2048. But that's actually really funny, because Troy, you've seen me play 2048, right?
Yeah, you taught me how to play and get the
So
2048.
so even in a game that seems mindless, there's actually potential for a lot of high level thinking. Like if you guys watch me play 2048, you'll think about halfway through, what the heck is he doing? That makes no sense. Why is he doing that?
Do you want to show
But-
us? Now you got me real interested. Like,
Yeah.
I can show you guys later after we talk about esports.
For sure.
So the way that esports was started at Westminster High School started out as a fundraiser for our choir, actually. So our choir teacher, who's a gamer, she wanted to do a fundraiser, so it was going to be a Smash Bros tournament because everyone plays Smash Bros. Except for me, because I don't have a Switch, because I was planning on buying a Switch in the middle of March, and then the pandemic happened and everyone bought all the Switches. I'm like, oh man,
Uh-huh.
Oh man.
so unlucky. But the first year it was just a fundraiser for choir, and then I think the second year was also a fundraiser for choir and band. And then a couple kids, one in band, decided, hey, we like Smash, let's start a club. And they asked me to be the club advisor. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll provide you guys a room. I don't know a thing about Smash, but it's cool. I used to main Pichu because I'm a troll. Where am I going with this? It was almost by accident that I was asked to be the club advisor for our esports club. I was already the club advisor for Smash Bros. We had a League of Legends team. This was 2 school years ago. We had a League of Legends team, and I didn't know about that. So going into the 2018-2019 school year, one of our principal of activities, thought these clubs are really similar. It would make more sense if we consolidated it. So she asked me to lead the club, and at that point, esports in high school was just not something I thought about. Like, Smash Bros is cool. It's just a fun club activity that we have. Like, that's all I thought about. But I didn't think about the greater impact that having a full esports program could have in a high school. And I discovered that through leading our Overwatch team in the 2018 season. So that was quite an experience. Like, it's actually really impressive how much drive people have to learn when they're passionate about something. And for the esports people, they're passionate about Overwatch, League of Legends, things like that, right? So, like, we would do things like you were saying, VOD review. Like, we'll record stuff. Our coach would give us strategies. We'd practice outside of games. People would practice on their own. We'd study professional games to learn strategies. Like, you don't see that in history, right? Like how many students go, oh, this is really interesting, I'm going to go study what professional historians do. You have some students, right? There are some students who are like, they usually tend to be like World War II buffs or things like that, right? So they'll learn about like all the different motivations of the different nations involved in the wars, but that's because they're really passionate about that. And so through history, those few people they're learning through history. But for the rest of us, it's like, why are we doing this? It's hard because we haven't learned why history is interesting. But with esports, the level of learning and self-motivated learning, because this isn't for a grade, it's just for a chance to say we are the best in Southern California, right? Like, that is such a strong motivating factor for some people. For other people, they don't care about Overwatch, so it doesn't matter. But for the people who do care about video games, the depth of learning that they have about it is insane. Like, people are talking about like frame data from Super Smash Bros. Like, oh, you need to wait till your second frame before you do. Like, I don't even see what you're talking about. You understand things. You're literally talking about things that my eyes and brain don't understand. Like, my brain and eyes cannot process what you're talking about right now. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like, and I think the value in esports is that it's not that everyone should be doing esports, but for the people who it's good for, now they have that opportunity because maybe they weren't going to be the history or math or science buff, and that's okay, right? Through esports, there are lots of different careers that you can go into related to esports. Like we know pro players exist, but what about coaches, team managers? What about the people who do the production for the tournament, right? Like you can think about so many people. There are people who market teams. There are people who market tournaments and organizations and events. There are people who do lighting, sound, graphics for live productions. Like there are sports psychologists. There are occupational therapists to make sure that esports players don't injure their hands. They're nutritionists to make sure they eat healthy. Like there's so many different careers that are related to esports. Like there are lots of careers related to everything else too, but like for the people who are excited about esports, they can figure out how to discover their future through esports. Like for me, I discovered my future through music, and I was lucky that we had music in high school. But if it was your destiny to figure out your future through esports and that didn't exist, then you're going to be really lost for a while. But if there was a program that could just help you discover what it is you want to do in the rest of your life, that should exist. So that's why it's really exciting to have esports.
Do you have any funny stories of esports? I know you told me when you can tell them about it.
I don't know which ones.
The one at the rally, or the pep rally.
So our Overwatch team was pretty successful for. Well, we'd always choke right before finals. So we would for 2 seasons straight, we went undefeated regular season, like barreled our way through the playoff bracket, and then something happened in the final match, right? Like that happened 2 years in a row. Their success and their hard work, our ASB and our administration wanted to feature them in the winter pep rally, which usually it's just sports. So we threw in esports for once, right? And one of our team captain actually edited a highlight reel of our Overwatch team from that past season, and everyone who saw the video beforehand, including like photo teacher and all the other coaches, said this is the best looking video because it was edited really nicely, right? Like with not just throwing random clips together, and there's a variety of clips. There were cool transitions and effects and things like that. There were storylines told within the edit. Most sports highlights are just score. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like it's just the same shot over and over again, just from different angles. So after like the first 2-3 corners, you just kind of get bored because you're seeing the same thing. Like in soccer, it's goal. Okay, well, we saw goals. That's not very exciting. But in our Overwatch team clip, there are a bunch of different plays that were being highlighted. So it looked really good, right? But when it was finally played at the rally, before it was played, I'm like, how is the school going to react to this? Is it going to be dead silent? Or what? I don't know. So before the rally, I talked to players and said, hey, we don't know how the school is going to react, but I think it's already a big win that the school is letting us feature Overwatch as a team sport in the winter rally. So that was already like, we really felt like we already accomplished something that was really cool. We did not expect the crowd to react the way that they did. The best way I can describe it is thunderous applause. Like you can feel the whole gym shaking from people's outbursts and cheering for the fact that they saw a video game being showcased at a pep rally. The funny part was I heard through back channels that there were a few people in sports teams that were a little bitter that like, why is video game being featured? It's not even a real sport. First, we don't claim that we're a sport. I personally hate the term esports because I feel like it's kind of misleading. I call it competitive gaming because that's actually what it is, right? But there was like this random bitterness because there was so much support for esports and not some of the other sports. So that was kind of funny. That was very few. Most people thought it was really cool because as we see culture evolve recently, it's really cool to be a nerd now. Nerdy things are cool. right? No?
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So, Mr. Vo, I want to say thank you for coming on our podcast. We really appreciate you coming on, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know we said an hour, and we've gone a little bit above that, and we've
It's
had
summer vacation. It's all good.
great stories. Great. I loved everything about the episode. I think it's going to be like one of the best episodes we've come out with so far. But I just want to leave you with one final question, which is, if you had one piece of advice that a listener could take away from this episode, what would it be?
That is a hard question. One piece of advice. If you asked me tomorrow or yesterday, I'd probably give a different answer. But in this moment, I will say just trust yourself and 100% go for it. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Great.
Sure,
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you so much again. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out. Yeah, thank you.